Sorry, I said universe. I meant to say university. The etymology of the word university is literally combined into one whole, right? So it's like basically the thing that, I don't know how we didn't recognize that one. And all of the things, think about how many people want to get into a university, but will claim that all of these other ways of putting together the idea of one world or under one world set of rules or ideas is like, no, we don't want that, right? Yeah, it's fascinating.
Were you guys palpably aware of the programming when you were at university?
My interaction with them wasn't common, so no, but I already knew it from going in, I guess. So I've always been like, I could see it in public schools, so by the time university came around, it was old news. But how about you?
I think I was an epic fail, not in terms of grades. I got good grades, but I dropped out and transferred so many times. And I think I've always been uncomfortable with that whole thing. I don't know, like I always felt like I didn't want to do whatever all the other people were doing. And sometimes that played out in that, like, it seemed, and maybe it was even how I felt, like I'm like this exception to the rule and I shouldn't have to do the same thing that all the other people in the class or the team or whatever is doing. But also I didn't like that feeling of being told what something means, right? Being without evidence. I didn't like that, like, and I was always the person asking why and never getting a satisfactory answer. So I was not comfortable in that system in junior high or high school, even though I did well, right? Like it was always, I was always saying I do not consent, basically.
Yeah. There's one thing to make it like people dependent on the system, but they've actually figured out how to make people champion it, right? And that's what's scariest to me. My education's always been backwards because I knew that they were doing this, and then I learned how they were doing this by seeing how they were doing this later, by actually attending a school and being like, oh, it really does work this way. And I can remember points in time in my life where I didn't believe it, where I was like, no, they can't really have this much control over people's minds. Like people can't really be this stupid. There must be people in the world who actually do see this, right? And even while I was going through the system, so to speak, and seeing how it was being taught to people, I was still in disbelief. I was like, no, people, like, this must not work, right? Like I was like hoping that once I got out of, like, say, high school and maybe into dealing with people in college and university level, that I would see that, they only seemed indoctrinated when they were in those lower grades, but once you got past that, that's when people actually did. But then when I got to that age, that's when I lost all hope. I was like, wait a second, no, it doesn't get better, it gets worse. It's almost like they're so locked in a pattern already by the time they get out of high school, and they're so, like, they don't know what the fuck they are, and then someone comes along and goes, oh, you're this, and they get so indoctrinated into the I'm that's all that they ever become. And I was disappointed. I still am, and that's why I kind of, like, in a lot of ways, I still just feel like there's got to be a fundamentally human aspect that's allowing all of this to perpetuate, that isn't just the fact that they're doing it to blame, right? Or that we can blame. There's got to be something that's in all of us that's allowing this to happen. And until we figure out what that is, then we can't really point blame on any side. And I feel like everything that's happening right now is going to show us whatever that is. There's going to be something that's just fundamentally within every element of this that probably not until hindsight, but we won't be able to deny at this point in time as being like, aha, that was the fucking problem. And if we could have just seen that, then maybe we could have done something. But it's so lost in this muddy water now that I don't know that we will.
Danny, I have an idea as to what it is, but I want to hear what you think first, because I think you were far more successful in the school environment than I was. But I have an idea, but I want to hear what you think about what he said first.
Well, what came to mind for me was victimhood. Like that was just what popped in, and just like this, like, human addiction to victimhood. I mean, to loop back, yeah, I did well in school. Like I played the game. I was like very good at being indoctrinated. But in college, I took a lot of Black Studies classes. And we had this like final paper, and I was like, well, it's so obvious to like take the like sane humanitarian, like humane perspective. So I'm going to take the racist perspective just as like a thought experiment for myself. And I failed. I got an F. And then it was just like, that's fucking bullshit. Like I backed everything up. I have citations just because you're personally offended. And it went up, up, up. And I had a few different things happen. Like I had multiple things happen that showed me that that like woke thing was like alive and well back then.
So did you start taking the Black Studies classes at Santa Barbara?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Hey, superstars. Thank you so much for sharing your sacred attention with me. If you are receiving any value whatsoever from my videos, I am encouraging you to give back, to pay it forward by supporting me on my Patreon community, on my locals community, on both. Your support allows me to keep on keeping on and to keep making content like this. It used to be much easier back in the days of a free press, but now given all of the censorship and the shadow banning, it really is challenging for content creators to continue to put out so much work. I'll just speak for myself. I'm excited for it to be easier for me to continue to put out more content. And the primary way that it can be easier is by you supporting me financially by way of my Patreon and or my locals, where for as little as $5 a month, you get to be my hero and receive oodles of bonus content, and we both get to win. Okay, thank you so much for your support, for your attention, and for being omniscopic amazingness.
That's where Kara got into it. So like that's where Kara, like my sister, she's a professor of Black Studies now, but that's where she sometime in her like sophomore or junior year, like got sort of diverted to that path. So
it was like a really cool department. Like we had a really cool culture around our Black Studies department, and we had a great gospel choir. Like all of that was very like alive and thriving at UCSB.
Yeah, I think that's sort of what she got kind of, why she got into it. So I think that your point is fair because you like did the exercise and you did it right, but you did it offensively. And so that's a fundamental like weakness in the human, like like the psyche or the intellectual device, the brain or whatever, that I'm going to let my feelings override my intelligence or my intellect or my sense of like what is true and not true. For me, I think it's this, like, I can't really speak to what happens when you're in graduate school because I was never there, but I did make it to a senior year in college, and I had like enough credits to graduate, but not in any one particular, department. So I couldn't get a degree. So I think I've been through a lot of college courses, and my experience was that the teaching got worse and worse as I went on. From the time I was in high school, like I went to a pretty good magnet school. I went to Cleveland in the Valley, and now they're lost in a sexual pedophilia scandal as well, like every other place I spent time as a kid. But it definitely set me up to have an easier time in college than people I knew who just went to like a standard high school or with the paper writing and all of that kind of stuff, right? But by the time I was in my junior and senior year in college, like the number of questions that I could ask a teacher that they didn't have the answer to, or that I knew, like I would come and talk about some fairly new, though not that new, information in whatever field we were talking about, and they had no idea what I was talking about, is part of it. So mediocrity, but also like, I think when you're asking what's the fundamental thing that humans are doing that's allowing this to happen, is I think that a lot of people, when they don't understand, when they're not able to get an answer as to why, they eventually just give in and stop asking. I know so many people who can't explain a certain step in the process of how they got from A to Z, and they just skip over that part because they ended up on the island with everybody else who says they understand how they got there, but really don't, right? And to continue to ask that question and it sounds like in some ways that's what you were doing with your paper. You're like, but look, I'm using logic and reason, and this is a position of a lot of people, whether it's like makes my emotions feel good or not is irrelevant, right? But when I was getting into things that like the answers I was getting from the teachers either didn't make sense, or sometimes they would literally say, it's this way because I say so, or because that's how it's done. And everybody else in the class would go along with that. And I would look like the crazy meth head that I was, but that it wasn't because of what I was saying. It was probably the energy with which I was saying it, which isn't that different than the energy with which I say things now. So I don't know how much we can really blame on the meth, but whatever it is, but like I felt crazy inside. But the question I was asking was always like a good question. And it's mostly the questions that I still have. And even like people that I know that are good friends of mine, like sometimes I'll say to them, like, poor Jeff, I say this to him all the time, and he takes a lot of punching and whatever from me, right? Like I'll say to them sometimes, like, I don't think you actually understand. Like you're watching this Christopher Nolan movie or you're watching this show and you're acting like you understand how they got from this part of the story to that part of the story, but you can't explain it to me. So I don't see how you could really understand it. Right. And sorry, Jeff, I'm not calling you out here, but you're like, I do this with lots of people, right? And I think that there's things that I say that don't make sense. And I want to be held to account to that, because until we get to the place where we're able to explain to any other person of reasonably open mind and reasonably good intelligence what we mean in a way that they could understand, neither them nor I understand it. That's it. And these people are the ones who are passing people through college and sending them off into the workplace to make decisions about all the things that we are going to be forced to consent to, whether we do or not.
Yeah, and Danny said victimhood, and a lot of people, especially kind of the new age crowd of the alternative community, would say savior programming. Well, you kind of can't have one without the other. And something that I often point out is if there's not something there for them to manipulate in you, then they're not going to be able to manipulate you. Right. So it's kind of more your responsibility to like make it so that you don't want the carrot that they're dangling, right? Than anything else. And you mentioned there's a few different types of ways that you pointed to it, like, and that's how it works, is that dangling carrot. It's like, if you follow this, this is what's you're going to get out of it, right? And we're not going to tell you how you get from there to there. You don't need to know. That's a need to know, and you don't need to know.